Dr. Marina Weiler from the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, where she is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences. Marina holds a Ph.D. from the University of Campinas, UNICAMP in Brazil.
The new program with the non-speaking autistic individual really excites me. I have weekly meetings with the therapists that work with the non-speakers, and it's almost like a shot of motivation for me to meet with them weekly and hear their stories. My other projects, like the out-of-body experiences, I am currently interviewing a lot of people that had what I call veridical OBEs, which is when a person during the out-of-body experience saw or heard something or had access to information and later verified to be true. And they can describe everything, the environment, what people were talking, how they were dressed, what happened. And then they come back to their bodies and they can verify. And I can also verify with a third person, with a witness, if that thing actually happened. So another one that I have within the out-of-body experience is exploring what types of entities people encounter during OBs and what's the, or after-death communication that people have during OBs. What's the impact? How do specifically they see the deceased person? How do they perceive the entities? What was the role of that entity in the OBE? How did you feel towards that entity? You know, children are just natural antenna. You know, they have so many experiences, anomalous experiences, and what adults tend to do is just to dismiss them and say, this was just a dream, this was just a hallucination. And that is so detrimental for children to be treated as a hallucination and a dream because it doesn't feel like that. For a child, it doesn't feel like a dream. It doesn't feel like a hallucination.
Hello and welcome back to Fire in the Cosmos. Today we are very excited to have with us a great friend of ours, Dr. Marina Weiler from the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, where she is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences. Welcome, Marina. Marina holds a Ph.D. from the University of Campinas, UNICAMP in Brazil, where her doctoral research focused on fMRI biomarkers in Alzheimer's disease. Her PhD thesis was distinguished with the Best Brazilian PhD Thesis Award in the field of medicine in 2016, and her contributions were recognized by the Brazilian Academy of Neurology on 3 separate occasions. Prior to joining DOPS at UVA in 2023, she had moved to the US from Brazil in 2016 and began work at the National Institute on Aging, part of the National Institutes of Health, and later at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. There, she focused on non-invasive brain stimulation to address age-related memory decline and investigated MRI biomarkers related to epilepsy following brain trauma. Currently, and this is where it gets good, at DOPS, her research interests have evolved to encompass topics such as out-of-body experiences, or OBEs, altered states of consciousness, mediumship, remote viewing, and telepathy, with a focus on OBEs, anomalous perception, and non-ordinary states of awareness. In 2021, she was a runner-up award recipient in the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Research, BICS, essay contest for the best evidence of an afterlife. Using tools such as EEGs, psychophysiology, and phenomenological interviews, she now interviews how extraordinary human experiences relate to brain function, meaning-making, and mental health. Marina is also a regular contributor to Psychology Today, where she writes the column Beyond the Ordinary. And she is doing amazing work to destigmatize so many of these topics. Thank you so much for joining us, Marina.
Hi, Anthony. Hi, Sinead. Thank you.
Hi, we're so delighted to have you here, Marina. It's really great to have you here. You're doing such really interesting work. And also, we love that you are not afraid to be on the cutting edge. And you're not afraid to push boundaries in science, because we feel, as many others do in the field right now, that it's really time for science to expand a little bit more and be willing to entertain new parameters of information and evidence. So maybe we can start with a usual question for guests, which is, about your childhood, because we're always curious about how these interests of, how do people end up where they are now, right? Like, how did you get into this field that's so edgy and fringe in some ways, right, to some people, but to us feels quite normal. So what were you like when you were a child? Did you have any unusual experiences or sensitivities at that time?
I would say that not as much as I was a child, more like early teenager, when I was having more of this type of anomalous experiences. I don't remember specifically when I was a young child having them, but yes, anomalous experiences were a part of my adolescence. And among the experiences that I had were I would have dreams with deceased people. That was something like that was really common to me, and it happens still with me. But I would receive messages. I remember one specific dream that I had with my deceased grandmother. And this was 5 years after she passed away. I was on my early 20s. And she came to me and she just said like a beautiful message that I didn't understand at the time. And then she just disappeared in those like quick, it was just weird, like those quick sound. And she was just going downwards and she disappeared after delivering the message. And it was just so real. I could see her. And then the following day, I told my mother and I said, I just had a dream with grandma. And that's what she told me. And when I shared with my mom, she was just crying because she was like, yeah, that makes sense because such and such, this is what's happening with your aunt. My aunt had something with my grandmother. So it was almost like a veridical message that she passed to me, and my mom was just so emotional and crying. So that is one instance, but I had other instances that are a little more spicy, if I could say that, which were very common to me too, which are the experiences that we call the poltergeist type phenomena, more like mind matter thing, where I would hear knockings on my windows, like knockings on my door and walls, as I am either falling asleep or in the middle of the night. Those experiences were very common to me. Again, they were still until a few months ago, objects falling, especially if I am praying or asking for a message or a resolution for something, like something is physically is going to happen in the room, or either lights flickering, or a light is going to shut down, or a light's going to light up, a book is going to fall from the shelf, like those things did happen to me a lot during my I would say from 10 until early 20s. And then I went to college and I have a bachelor in science, and then I became a scientist. And that was my first approach to science. And during college, I learned how to be a physicalist and a materialist. So during that time, I was studying the evolution of life, DNA, and humans are monkeys, and all of those things. And then all the experiences that I was having growing up didn't make sense and didn't fit into that model that I was learning during college. And it was a really hard moment for me to just shift my entire ontological view, like world view, into that box. But I had to do it because it just didn't fit anymore. And it was interesting because at that same time, and that happened for the next 10 years until like my 20s, until I would say late 20s, I stopped having these experiences, or at least I wasn't aware that they were happening anymore. But I don't remember having anomalous experiences during that time. Or, I mean, I don't know if they were happening or I was just easily dismissing them because that's what I was doing at that time. So then during my late 20s, when I finished my PhD, I was in Brazil at that time, University of Campinas, in the laboratory of neuroimaging, very mainstream. I did my PhD in very mainstream neuroscience, work with Alzheimer's disease. And then I had a very good friend of mine. He's a physicist and one of the smartest people that I've ever met. And he was very open to spirituality and to the spiritist tradition that is relatively common in Brazil. And in my mind, I was thinking, how can this guy, a physicist, so mainstream, expected to be so mainstream, can be open to spirituality on all of these phenomena? And that just didn't, I was like, it's not possible that those two things coexist. And then he was just so calm and so patient with me, and then he held my hand and he said, Marina, why don't we start reading about the evidence? Why don't we start reading about this article? Why don't we start reading about this book? And then I bought the book Irreducible Mind from my colleague Edward Kelly at Dobbs. And then I read the first chapter, and then we would meet on Zoom to have a discussion about it, and then read the first chapter, and then have a discussion on Zoom and debrief about it. And then it started happening with many other phenomena. And I reached a point that I couldn't unsee anymore what I was seeing. So I approached anomalous experiences not from a personal experiential perspective anymore, but from an intellectual experience now. And I think that was really important for me because, as I mentioned before, I was like, it cannot coexist someone being so educated and intelligent and being a physicist and being a scientist and believing in this type of phenomena. But then once I started reading it and approaching from a different perspective and being more open minded, everything changed. And then in 2021, when I had to write the essay for the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies contest, and we wrote about Chico Xavier, the medium, I think that was definitely a game changer for me because I spent 4 or 5 months full time reading about the phenomenon of mediumship and witnesses and the literature that he's produced, and just how good the evidence is about afterlife, at least when it comes to his legacy. And that was a completely game changer to me. I just could not unsee that anymore.
That's so beautifully said, Marina. I love that you said that, you were struggling so much with the intellectualism of this person, this friend of yours, right? The physicist who also had these other beliefs, because of course, all of us are, depending on culture, maybe where you are in the world, we're so thoroughly taught that one of these things is impossible and the other one is possible and they can never intersect. But right now we're living in this very interesting time where more and more and more we're seeing the intersectionality between all these phenomena. We're realizing that they're not separate. They're all somehow connected. And science seems to be gradually picking up on this and being more willing to participate. Like Stuart Hameroff, who created the Science of Consciousness conference, was blown away by the fact that this past year, when the two of us were there, you and I, Marina, that, those smaller rooms with the fringe topics, the people that were talking about fringe topics, they were overflowing. There were lines out the door and down the hall. There were people like standing room only, people sitting on the carpet, stuffing into the room because they wanted to hear these topics so badly. And Stuart had not expected that. I mean, he's very left brain. He's a scientist. So it's interesting how even conferences like that, like the Science of Consciousness that's been around for 34 years, has always been so incredibly academic, even that context is now flexing because they're starting to go, oh, hang on a second. Not only are all these people who are, for the most part, very curious, intellectual, thoughtful, carefully, analytical people who go to these conferences, and also spiritual, right, as well. They want more of this. And not only that, the scientists are starting to go, oh, hang on a second. So what are you seeing around you in the field? Like, how do you think that things are changing and are not changing?
I think that it's a realization that it took me a long time to have, that many people don't understand, is that yes, we can study spirituality and anomalous experiences scientifically. And people have the misunderstanding that science is one thing, spirituality is another completely different thing. It's related to religion, and they don't talk to each other. There is nothing to do. And there is almost like this superior attitude and arrogant attitude that scientists know everything and they don't talk about anomalous experiences and spirituality. And once you learn, and I would say that that's the first approach, that's the first attitude. And mindset that people have when they approach science. And that's how I was once I was in college doing my Bachelor of Science. And I was like, science does not explain that, and I hear this all the time. Science does not explain that phenomena. And then you have to deconstruct everything and say, hey, you have to understand that science is a way of studying the universe. Science is a tool, is a way of approaching the truth. What you were talking about explaining or not explaining is the current philosophical framework called physicalism. So yes, those experiences, anomalous experiences, they do not fit into the physicalism framework, but that doesn't mean that science does not explain. It's completely different, the philosophical framework and science. And yes, it does take a while for people to understand that anomalous experiences and spirituality can and should be scientifically studied. And that's what we do at the Division of Perceptual Studies and many other places like IONS. But at DOBS, yes, we approach these experiences very scientifically. We are very rigorous. We are very skeptical, with scrutiny. So we are scientists. Most of us come from mainstream science, and we are applying the scientific tools to study these experiences. So I think it's just a misunderstanding that people usually have, and then saying this is pseudoscience. No, this is not pseudoscience at all. This is very scientific. It's like you are just misunderstanding science by physicalism, which is the current philosophical framework that we have today to explain that can be changed, that can and should be changed as soon as physicalism cannot explain anymore the facts and the phenomena that we are currently experiencing, that we are reporting, that's being reported over the last 150 years, so like well documented. When physicalism cannot explain that anymore, then we do need to change the paradigm. And I do hope that in the next few years or decades, we are going to have a new philosophical framework that is going to be able to account for everything that we are observing.
Do you think
Mm.
it's heading that way? I mean, are you optimistic about it?
I am. I already think that it's been happening. I haven't been studying anomalous experiences for that long, so I've been adopts. This is my third year adopts, but I think that what my colleagues that have been in the field for 30, 40 years, all of them are optimistic, and they say we would never see, for example, the science of consciousness, which it's there's a lot of mainstream scientists there, and as you mentioned, we are talking about out of body experiences, we are talking about cases of reincarnation, we are talking about after death communication and near death experiences. So I think at least I am seeing more opening to a phenomena like that in conferences.
Wonderful.
So thank you, Marina. That's great. Before we dive in too much about your current work, there are some things you mentioned in your upbringing that I think would be very interesting to touch on. The topics we usually cover on this show and the field that we inhabit is generally very Western leaning and Northern Hemisphere leaning. Can you speak a bit more about some of the things you mentioned about your upbringing in Brazil? I think that will be really good for our audience to hear, especially what Spiritism is. You mentioned that, and how more integrated their health system is compared to ours with different traditional belief systems. Do you mind touching on that a bit?
Sure. So, yes, as you mentioned, I am originally from Brazil, and I lived in Brazil until 2016. It is spiritually, it's a completely different background, and religiously too. Brazil is the largest Catholic country in the world, and we also have Spiritism and other African religions, Candomblé and Ubanda, who also um, touch base on afterlife and possession and spirits and phenomena that spiritist also talks to. So nowadays we have around 3% of the population, the Brazilian population, who subscribe to spiritism. And spiritism came originally from France. The founder of spiritism was a guy called Allan Kardec, and That was in like in late 19th century, and he just came to Brazil. He found a very fertile ground in Brazil. The phenomenon originally started in France when they were doing the seances with the spinning tables, and they were communicating, inducing communication with spirits, and that's how he wrote his books. So Allan Kardec wrote 5 books about mechanisms for afterlife and spirits and communication with spirits and after death communication in general. So he provides a lot of responses towards mechanisms, which is very interesting. So nowadays, yes, 3% of the population subscribe to Spiritism. But if we talk about belief in afterlife, that's a lot higher than that because of other African religions that also subscribe to afterlife beliefs. And I think it was very important in my upbringing and my childhood because in Brazil, this is just so common. You know, we are raised watching TV and reading the news about mediumship and phenomena like that. So João de Deus, Chico Xavier, all of these famous mediums, they are just part of our culture growing up. And it's not something that, like here in the United States, I felt a huge difference coming here because people don't even understand the concept sometimes of an afterlife and mediumship and after death communication, which to us is just so common. And I think that played a huge difference in obviously my beliefs and how I normalize these experiences.
Mm. Thank.
Definitely. I mean, I'm thinking about what you said. You said this to me in a conversation, like just casual conversation. We were hanging out. It was actually at Callie and Steve. So Anthony, you might have been in the room. But I remember you talking, Marina, about when you were a kid and just hearing mediumship being spoken about, quite openly, and like knowing of people through who might have been family or family friends who were practicing mediumship or doing some form of mediumship. And it really did seem like the impression I got was that from a young age, this really was incredibly normal to you. And so I remember thinking about children at that point. And I know Allan Kardec, I saw a film about his life. He was working with those 2 sisters, like 2 little girls, initially, who I think, is this right, Marina? I remember that there being 2 children, 2 girls who were sisters. He discovers them and discovers that they're able to get in contact with this presence, and they're able to channel the presence through writing or drawing something on paper on the table that ended up becoming the seance table. And one of the things that is bringing a great amount of interest. I don't know if it's an increasing interest or if it's just more obvious to me. But in this field, science and spirituality, right, where they intersect, there's a lot of interest now in children and this new generation of children that's being spoken about as being quite different or having more sensitivities, more abilities, whether they're non-speaking autistic or not. There's a lot of talk about, well, how are we looking at children, right? Not just because of the state of the world, what's happening in the world right now, climate change and political tensions and so on. What kind of a world are we bringing our kids into, of course, is one of the questions. But it's more that bigger question of where are we going as a human race, like as a collective together on this planet, where are we going, right? And are we paying attention to children and what they're able to create in terms of the future? So I'm seeing that there's a lot of intersection here with the phenomena. And we were talking earlier about the telepathy tapes and those children, right? How the telepathy tapes has become the #1 podcast in the world. There's so much interest in non-speaking autistic children or non-speaking autistic people. What is your take on um, that topic? Like, you have a child of your own. You have a lot of friends who have children, who are colleagues who are also working in this field. Is this a topic of conversation? Like, do you think that this is also an area where science is going to eventually lead, is, studying unusual children and what they might be bringing to the world in a new way? Is that a topic you're coming across at all?
Yes, and I do hope that we see more research with children because children are just natural antenna. They have so many experiences, anomalous experiences, and what adults tend to do is just to dismiss them and say this was just a dream, this was just a hallucination, and that is so detrimental for children to be treated as a hallucination and a dream, because it doesn't feel like that. For a child, it doesn't feel like a dream. It doesn't feel like a hallucination. And as I mentioned, I do have a son that he has his own experiences and he's completely terrified of them. It has been affecting my family deeply. During nighttime, he sees things, he hears things, and it's been very challenging for me at some point, because what I heard from even people that were close to me is that, do you think your son has early onset schizophrenia? And that was terrifying to hear. And I was like, no, I don't think my son has early onset schizophrenia. I think he's having anomalous experiences and he is probably very sensitive, but I don't want to pathologize and I do not want to send him to a psychiatrist. And no, I mean, I don't want to. It's not that I was in denial, I just don't see it that way. And I do know that many mental health professionals tend to pathologize these experiences. And I was like, this is not happening to my son. I'm going to do everything that I can to treat him and make him feel comfortable with his experiences from a different perspective. So, what I've been trying to do with him is talk to me about your experiences. I'm here to listen to you. So, he had out of body experiences, he had sleep paralysis. He sees entities, not good ones around the house, that he's completely terrified. But what I want to do is offer him a I want him to see me as a rock, as someone as he can talk to and feel validated, and feel heard about his experiences. Because I think that's the first step that we should be taking with children. Obviously, I can offer him other things which I have been doing, like, how do you protect yourself from this? Let's imagine a spiritual shield or energetic shield, or how do we send these monsters, entities away? Maybe you can send them some love. Have you tried? All of those things I do try to talk to him, which I think have helped a lot.
Wonderful.
So, yes, not pathologizing. Unfortunately, we don't see much research with children, so I am trying to do that. I have a friend called Alison Paradise. She was a person that had many experiences growing up. She still does, but growing up, she was completely terrified of her experiences. And I hope she allows me to share this. But growing up, her mom would treat her experiences as allergies. So she would always take she grew up thinking that she was allergic to everything, because that's how her mom was
Mhm.
dealing with her experiences. And then it wasn't until later, when she was grown up, that she was like, I don't think those things were allergies. I think I was having experiences. So it took her decades to integrate and overcome what her mom was telling her. So, yes, I really hope to see more research with children, and just this, in general, pathologization of experiences. And
Thanks.
Anthony, I just, you can edit this if you want. You asked me in the previous questions about my experience in Brazil and how spiritualism and spiritism is seen in Brazil and integration with mental health. And I forgot to answer to that
Yeah,
piece.
thanks.
That is also another important piece about the how our culture and our background in Brazil integrates with mental health institutions and professionals. And it's interesting to see, and I'm going to share that I'm also working with a psychiatrist in Brazil, that he is very mainstream. And I'm going to give you an example so you understand. He's very mainstream, and he works in a mainstream hospital and clinic where he prescribes medication whenever he thinks it's appropriate for schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, any other disorders. But to me, what's interesting is that he also works at this other clinic, which is more spiritualized, with this spiritual approach, because he subscribes to spiritism. And in this second clinic, he he approaches those patients with his disorders differently, from a spiritual point of view, from a spiritual intervention, let's put it this way. And he shared with me that for all those years that he's been working with this different approach, he was never required to prescribe any medication to his patients if he uses the spiritual intervention to treat. So like this to me is so interesting, and again we go back to this over pathologization and prescription of medicines to maybe patients that don't need to go through that if we approach them differently. So another thing is that in Brazil we have what's called spiritist hospitals, and the patients that go to spiritist hospitals, they are receiving mainstream traditional interventions, but they are also receiving spiritual interventions. And I have a colleague right now who is conducting a clinical trial comparing the spiritual interventions with mainstream interventions. And the results are not disappointing at all. So I would love to see more of that spiritual approach
That's amazing.
in patients in the health care too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and how is that viewed? I mean, you said the majority of the country is Catholic. 3% are Spiritist. Are the Catholics more open to it than they are here to other approaches and generally speaking, belief systems in Brazil?
I would say that in general, the country is more open to those approaches. I mean, if you get like a strict Catholic person, they will not believe in reincarnation and many of the beliefs of Spiritism. But the thing is that in Brazil, we have so many religions, and I would say that the majority of the population has a combination of beliefs. You know, they're Catholic, but they also believe in some things from Spiritism. They also believe in some things from Candomblé, from Umbanda. So it's a huge mix up of religions and beliefs. So I think in general, the population is more open to those approaches.
That's what I've heard too. Yeah, it's very syncretic. Yeah.
Yeah, and Anthony, you're making me think because of this question about okay, so my question for you, Marina, is the spiritual interventions that are given, that are provided in these spiritist hospitals, are they also a kind of mishmash from Catholicism? Like, what is the approach? You know, is it very esoteric? Is it based in Catholicism but not dogmatic Catholicism? What does that spiritist intervention or treatment look like in these hospitals?
They are basically depossession. So the Spiritism has something that they called passe. And passe is like when you are giving someone's energy. So it's like a healing that some mediums learn how to do to treat others, like passing their energies and curing other people. So there's a very common approach, but there
Similar
could
to
be
Reiki?
it could be, yeah, it could be similar to Reiki. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily consider like the chakras, so I don't think it has that esoteric approach like Reiki. It's more like a cleansing, a spiritual cleansing. And so that would be definitely one approach. Something there are other different approaches that are more tailored, which are more as like a deep possession kind of thing, considering some people could be under the influence of entities or energetic parasites. So they would do more heavy interventions for the patient to get rid of those entities or parasites.
Mm.
Interesting, interesting. Wow. I would love to visit one of those hospitals. That's super fascinating. So then what brought you, considering how the culture is in Brazil, what brought you to North America?
Work. So I came to the United States because unfortunately in Brazil it is very hard to pursue research, and we just the government doesn't fund research as here in the United States. I know we are facing a lot of problems now in the United States, but in general it's completely different. So I came to the United States in 2016 when I finished my PhD for a postdoc at the National Institutes of Health, and just to grow in general as a scientist, because I just found that I wouldn't have that opportunity in Brazil.
Mm,
I wanted to ask you something about you mentioned like in your opinion how important it is to do more research with children on these issues and others. So I wanted to ask you about this because I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but in some of the fields that we look at on this show, there is unfortunately this like darker history of experimentation with psi phenomena and even getting into the UFO side of things as well, an NHI side of things. That has created this environment where there is oftentimes a fear of research from the community, the experiencer community. How do you balance that in your approach at DOPS? How do you address ethics when it comes to research with children or otherwise? Just to kind of demystify this, and how do you take that into consideration with the need to actually progress this field and evolve our paradigm around this way of thinking?
It's a very important question and delicate. I had in my professional history adopts some people misunderstanding and thinking, and this is not very rare, unfortunately, people thinking that adopts we have relationship with intelligence, with CIA, that we are funded by intelligence to recruit participants and use their psychic powers, which is completely not true. We are not funded. We have no government funding at all, and especially not from intelligence. So this is definitely not our approach, and this is something that I want to make very clear here. Especially because now I'm starting to work with the non-speaking autistic individuals, and this is not a fear that I want them to have. So it is very important to have that approach. I think we have to just keep in mind that um, their identities. So this is something that I've been working with my research team, is how do we preserve their identities, like, so we don't talk about their full names during our meetings, we don't share in our meetings their identities, we talk about P1, P2, participant 3. And the therapists that I'm working right now with the non-speakers, they, like, this is, I'm constantly educating them and saying, you are, only you know who your students are. So you're going to have a notebook at home where you have their names, but whatever files that we have shared on an UVA drive, we don't put names, we don't think anything that can leak or other people can have access to that information. We're being really careful about identity leakage. So I think this is an important approach. And obviously, when we recruit participants, this is something that it's a long conversation that we need to have with them and make them feel very comfortable about being in our projects and what are and and make them understand what are the consequences of participating in our research. So I think we have to make them very comfortable that this is completely up to them to stop at any point if they don't feel comfortable. So just those types of approach. This is something that I'm constantly trying to have on my program.
What do you mean by the consequences? What can you give some examples?
Consequences of them possibly being there might be identity leakage. I cannot guarantee this is never going to happen. We try everything we can, but there is only so much I can do. But I am going to be recording my patients from the back when I do my experiments, but there is always a minimum possibility that the participants are going to be identified. And the last thing that I want right now is that my participants are identified and approached by intelligence to be used for something darker, as you mentioned.
Gotcha. So you mean these are like standard disclaimers that you would have in any sort of research?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. What with your approach, I'd like you to touch a bit on what, like, I think it's important for the audience to understand the context for an institution like DOPS at UVA and the history there, and what's driving your department to do this work. So would you mind giving just like a few minute briefer for folks? Because I don't think most people are even aware of your history and why and how you got into this.
The Division of Perceptual Studies was founded in 1967 by Ian Stevenson. He was a psychiatrist. At the time, he was the head of the psychiatry department. And he came across many cases of children that apparently were having recollections of past lives. That's how he interpreted at the moment what he was seeing in the clinic. So he decided to step down his appointment as the chief of department to dedicate to studying those cases. And he traveled around the world for the next decades, just investigating possible cases of reincarnation. So this is the I would say the main project, the flagship that we have. Adopts are studying spontaneous cases of reincarnation in children, specifically in children. And then we also study near death experiences and after death communication or psychic experiences in the lab, remote viewing, mediumship, out of body experiences. And now we are also going to start with the non-speaking autistic individuals. So we have many, jobs is composed of many professionals with different backgrounds. So I'm a neuroscientist. There is another one of my colleagues is a neuroscientist. We have experimental psychologists. We have social psychologists. We have clinical psychologists. We have psychiatrists. So it's a very rich place to work because of our different backgrounds and different points of views that we can approach the same phenomenon.
And would you say, is there like a unifying driving goal or mission for why you all do all that interesting work? Like, what are you trying to show or to get to in the field?
The unified mission is studying what we call extraordinary experiences. And by extraordinary experiences, we mean those type of phenomena that I described that don't fit this current paradigm, philosophical framework, which is physicalism. So the studies that we are investigating, the phenomena we are investigating don't usually fit this philosophical framework. So this is the overlapping interest that all the scientists have adopts.
That's fantastic. And then, Marina, to bring it to the present, what is exciting you right now in your research? What is really making you feel intrigued and curious, and what's lighting up your brain? It could be your own research, could be somebody else's research in the field, but what's really exciting you right now?
So many things excite me. It's like it's hard to pinpoint one, but the new program with the non-speaking autistic individual really excites me. I have weekly meetings with the therapists that work with the non-speakers, and it just is so invigorating. It's just like it's almost like a shot of motivation for me to meet with them weekly and hear their stories and what they've done in the past week and all the piloting they are doing and sharing the experiences they are having with their students. That is just so fascinating to hear the stories, and that keeps me going. But my other projects, like the out of body experiences, I am currently interviewing a lot of people that had what I call veridical OBEs, which is when a person during the out of body experience saw or heard something or had access to information and later verified to be true. So I am also interviewing those people, and as you can imagine, I get to hear the most fascinating stories of people that are in out of body experiences, and they can describe everything, the environment, what people were talking, how they were dressed, what happened, and then they come back to their bodies and they can verify, and I can also verify with a third person, with a witness, if that thing actually happened. So this also excites me at the moment. I have this project, and there are other ones that I'm currently engaged. So, for example, another one that I have within the out of body experience is exploring what types of entities people encounter during OBs and what's the or after death communication that people have during OBs. What's the impact? How do specifically they see the deceased person? How do they perceive the entities? What was the role of that entity in the OB? How did you feel towards that entity? So that's a really exciting project that I have to.
That's super interesting. What kind of entities are they? Are, like, I mean, tell us a story. What's an example of a kind of entity people experience, or an example of really standout OBE that someone had? Tell us a story.
Let me see if I can remember specific stories about entities and what led me to that study. So the entity study right now is a survey online, and we do have room for people to share their entire experiences. So I don't have the stories on that survey right now, but the stories that I have were just conversations that I had in the past with participants or friends of mine that had entity encounters. So one to me that was very remarkable was this guy that approached me, and he was telling me that many of his OBs were very scary. And the reason why they were very scary is because he would have body paralysis, so he wasn't able to move his body, which was very terrifying for him. And he would see entities in his room, specifically um, and to me that was very remarkable, but because he would mention this black entity, like almost like a smoke, but it was this like dark energy, smoky, without shape. And in one of these experiences, he could feel this entity in his room. His body was paralyzed. There was nothing he could do. He was out of his body. He couldn't communicate. He couldn't send the entity away. And at some point, he went to his parents' room out of his body. He went to his parents' room. He was a teenager at this time. He went to his parents' room trying to get help, and he was just screaming and screaming for help and saying, there is this entity and he's going to take over my body. He felt that this was the intention of the entity, to take over his body. And he went to his parents yelling for help. He couldn't wake them up, which was very terrifying. And at some point, he came back to his body. I don't remember exactly what happened, but he came back to his body, and he went to the bathroom. And as soon as he saw himself in the mirror, this was like 3 a.m. when he saw himself in the mirror, he saw a black smoke coming out of his mouth,
Whoa.
like almost as if he had ingested something. So he told me I could see something coming out of my mouth, like this very dense black smoke. That story to me, and I can just imagine how terrified he felt. But not all entity encounters are terrifying like that. Many are. Many people, when they encounter entities during OBs, they are scared. And I would say the reason is mostly because people don't know how to deal with the entities, and somehow they can sense their intentions. And many times the entity is there to pull them away of their body. So this is something that is very commonly reported, is that I was in my bedroom, and then I felt something grabbing my ankles and it pulled me out of my body. So this is so commonly reported. The entity was there to take me out of my body. And another experiencer told me that as soon as the entity grabbed her ankles, it started shaking her like a doll, and she felt harassed, and she was like, this entity is just not respecting me. And it was just shaking her in the bedroom and then putting her upside down, and she could see herself in the mirror like hanging upside down, and she felt so disrespected. Yeah, so you can imagine they are terrifying, but again, like none of them are terrifying like that. Many people encounter deceased people, they receive messages, there are good entities that are also coming and helping them. So there are good ones too. I think I just shared the ones that were more remarkable to me.
Let me ask you a question about that, because I'm thinking now about I've been involved in ufology for a really long time and found out about Ray Hernandez's book. You know, Ray Hernandez is a brilliant man. I won't go into too much detail, but brilliant man who wrote this massive book. It's humongous, but it's an amazing record of research, in-depth research about experiencers. It was done through Edgar Mitchell's foundation, the Free Foundation. So essentially, what I want to ask you about is this one aspect of the research where Ray Hernandez and his colleagues interviewed a really large number of people about essentially encountering extraterrestrials, or what they would consider to be extraterrestrials or non-human intelligence, or UFOs, right? And so, of course, you know, some of these experiences were abductions, and they were really terrifying and invasive. Other ones were positive. Most of them were kind of in the gray area where people were just stunned, scared, shocked, didn't know how to digest it. But what he found was very interesting is that the majority of people who initially, when they first initially had an experience with ET, NHI, UFO, and it would be absolutely terrifying and scary to them, regardless of the context. Could be an abduction, could be something else. But the point is they experienced terror and fear. The majority of those people later on changed their perspective about that experience and said that they realized that although at the time they were very scared, that fear did not actually characterize the context of what was happening accurately. It was really just their emotional response to the experience, but the experience itself was not actually negative, and that the vast majority of these people later on realized that they had experienced something very significantly positive from that seemingly scary event. It could have been a shift in their worldview or a better sense of understanding of how the world works, or, basically they're changed or healed even, right? They might have had a physical issue of some kind and been healed. So I'm wondering if you're encountering that also in your research, that maybe initially people are very scared. They think that they see a scary entity. They're terrified. They feel like they don't have control over their body or their circumstances. But later on, they think, oh, actually, that was scary at the time, but it serves me now. It benefits me now in some way in my life. Do you ever hear that? Is that a common experience in your research?
Yes, it is. And I would say that as people start having more OBEs and becoming more experienced and even inducing them, they see entity encounters completely different, as you mentioned. And they just learn how to deal with that energy, with that presence. They learn how to grow and maybe receive whatever message or send them away if they're not welcome. So I think as people become more experienced, they tend to lose their fear towards entity encounter. It is obviously the first shock, like having an OBE by itself, it's something that causes an ontological shock in many people. Just if you don't encounter any entity, it can be already very scary, and people just like they feel they're dying. What's happening to me? Why is my body there? And that by itself can be a shock. Imagine if you have that and also encounter entities who, like someone who's pulling out of your body or doing things that you think the person is going to take over your body. So but once you learn how to deal with them and shift your understanding, then yes, I do think that people tend to lose their fear. I have a friend right now that she had one of these experiences that she was pulled out of her body and she was upside down and she was just terrified, like the one. And now she just learned how to induce her OBs. She has naps during the afternoon to have OBs, and she's completely comfortable. If she sees something in her bedroom, whatever that she doesn't like, she's just like, you are not welcome here, go away. Or she will interact. It's like one of those things in life that you just have to face
Mhm.
and learn how to lose. And another thing interesting is that when you mention abduction, is that in the UFO field, many people report being mentally abducted instead of like the physical body. They do report, oh, they abducted just my soul or my ethereal body or whatever you want to call. And that to me is so remarkable because it almost sounds like an OB. It's just from a different approach. Like what I'm seeing is the way that I approach is how you felt or you felt outside of your body. And okay, you had an entity pulling, but then UFO researchers are seeing more from a different approach, from more like the abduction approach. So, but it seems that we are talking about the same phenomenon here.
Yes. What do you think of that? What do you think it seems like the same phenomenon?
I think it definitely seems like the same phenomena. People are just reporting differently with different names, whereas some called, an UFO abduction, others are gonna call I had an OB and an entity pulled me.
But what do you think is the reason for that? Like, why do you think, just in your own, just to play with this, like you don't need to provide, an answer. Because personally, Anthony and I don't know about Anthony. I feel like this more myself, that there is no answer. That it's the mystery that is important to investigate, and that we're all on this journey where we're constantly learning. This is my own personal philosophy, right? So I don't think everybody should think like this. This is how I think. So How do you think about this? How do you think about the fact that there are all of these intersectionalities and commonalities? Like, if you were going to narrow it down to a seed or one, do you think, for example, that consciousness is fundamental to everything? Do you think that this is all about consciousness and we're all expressing consciousness in various forms, whether it appears to be so-called normal or not normal, right? Like phenomena versus 3D, regular, normal human life, as some people might call it, right? What do you think of that? Do you think all of this is an illusion and where consciousness is fundamental and all these things that happen, we just sort of organize them into what's strange or weird and what's normal based on our own perceptions? Or do you think there's something much bigger going on here? There's so many different ways we can go with it, right? Like, we're all playing around with the millions of possibilities of what could be going on, but ultimately nobody knows, right? We're all just playing with ideas. So where do you stand with all of this? Like, these threads that bind all of these seemingly separate and different experiences that bind them together. What do you think about that?
And you as
Yeah.
Marina, so not Dops, you as Marina.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a good point. This is me as Marina. This is such a complex question, and it's hard to provide just a brief answer, but I think I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. The way that I see is, yes, all these different phenomena that we are talking about, that we see in parapsychology, psychic experiences, UFO, they are more related than many people think. And the way that I see is, yes, consciousness is fundamental, is obviously non-local, it is fundamental. And I don't like to use the word illusion, but the physical world is just one of the realities, but it's not the only reality, at least not the most fundamental reality. The physical world, as the way that I see, is a school that provides us the opportunity to make choices. So this is what we are here for, to learn, we are here on a spiritual journey to learn, to experience relationships with friends, with family, challenging relationships that require a lot from us, and to make choices. But at a fundamental level, yes, we are all connected. And obviously, I don't think that humans are the only spiritual beings out there. There are many other spiritual beings, and us as humans, we have this human body, but there are many other thought forms, let's put it this way, or things that we cannot see, or that I think are in different dimensions and different frequencies that some people can reach. Some people can observe, others cannot. Some people have communication, some people can have connection, others cannot. What else can I tell you?
Well, we can get lost in this topic, right? It is so huge, as you said. It's not an easy answer, but I feel like you did do a beautiful job just now, so thank you. I mean, it is a big I don't know, right? All we can do is muddle around in it. And there's people like you who are scientists, people like Anthony who have the totally different background. I have a totally different background. Yet all three of us and our friends and our community, we're all here together, constantly thinking and talking about what is going on. What is this mystery that we're all trying to investigate in our own ways? So personally, I'm very grateful that you're bringing this scientific perspective, because we really need it. We need help. I think as humanity, we need help grounding ourselves in experience, even if science is not the answer. As you said, it's a tool, right, for us to use to try to figure things out. But it is a way that is really useful and helpful to help us ground ourselves in maybe little nuggets of information and little increasing, pieces of evidence or so-called proof that we can use to help ourselves feel like we're able to make some sense of what's going on, because the world does seem to be getting weirder, right? It seems like more and more people around the world are having unusual experiences. That could just be because of phones. Maybe now we can share all these experiences with each other, so it seems like there's more. But it also does feel like, Anthony and I talk about this a lot, like there's a big shift happening on the planet. And it's this constant clash between, belief systems and science and experience and what people think they know. I mean, it is a big tangled ball of yarn, and I kind of don't mind that. I don't mind that it's a journey and an adventure. But for you in science, you need to have like linear processes. You need to be able to have evidence. You need to be able to get funding for your research. It is very in the 3D, isn't it? So do you feel like there's a conflict in what you're doing? Like, do you feel this kind of tension at all when you're in your work, doing your work with your colleagues? Do you feel this tension between the spiritual, the esoteric, the metaphysical, the I don't know, and then also what your responsibilities are, which is to do research and, make it real for people in this dimension? Do you feel that tension during your work?
I do feel a lot. And it's hard sometimes to separate the Marina, the scientist, and Marina, the person, and my personal beliefs. It's hard. And I think it can be, it can be a challenge, but at the same time, it's a gift. As you mentioned, in science, we need to be very careful with what we're doing. And what we are doing at DOPS is already so controversial that we need to be extra careful not to be called pseudoscientists. We don't want to talk about chakras. We don't want to talk about crystals. We don't want to talk about UFO. We don't want to be, associated with the UFO community because we already do parapsychology, because we're already talking about reincarnation, and we already being mistreated, and we already being called pseudoscientists. So, there is this tension that there is only so much that we can do. And it's interesting to me that once I'm completely fascinated. I'll give you an example about this lady in Brazil that does materialization, the cotton lady I mentioned to you, Sinead. And I just wanted to study her because I think that the phenomenon that I've seen is just one of the most fascinating things that I've seen. Like, she materializes objects out of thin air. And I really wanted to study this. And at the time, our director came to me and said, "No, we don't do materialization at DOPS." And he was just trying to protect. And I kind of understand now. He was just trying to protect our, um, And I didn't argue at the time. I could have said, if we don't do, who else is going to do? And I know Ian Stevenson published about materialization and all of those things. But right now, I do feel that some people try to protect what we do, not to be associated with pseudoscience. But to me, not on my papers, obviously not on the papers that I'm trying to publish, but in my mind, I do make use of chakras and crystals and all of those things that are not scientific to make sense of everything that I'm seeing. But there is only so much that I can put on my papers. There is only so much that I can talk on my conferences. There is only so much that I can talk on my blog, because unfortunately, people are going to think, oh, if she is talking about all of this esoteric, it means she's full of BS and she's not a good scientist and she doesn't know what she's doing, which is completely not the case.
Yeah, it's really too bad. It really is. Like, I mean, I'm thinking back to, so when I was working with Grant Cameron a few years ago, I was lucky enough to interview this incredible physical medium. His name is Stuart Alexander. And Leslie Kane is very close with Stuart. She has a blackout room in her apartment in New York, where she joins in at a distance in his home circle, his because he's a physical medium, so he has a circle that he sits with, right? He's just extraordinary. And interviewing him, Grant and I were interviewing him and Leslie together. It is by far my favorite interview of all the interviews that Grant and I did together, because it had this wonderful intersection of basically what you were just describing. Like, there's a tension, between the metaphysical, the esoteric, and so on, and science. But there's also this kind of amazing partnership that can happen. And Leslie is not a scientist. She's a journalist and a researcher and stuff. But she is very skeptical. She's very grounded in her approach. She really researches incredibly thoroughly. You've spoken to her. We sat together at Psy Games this past summer, and we were talking about your work. And I was remembering the description that Leslie gave of an experience she had with Stuart, where Stuart she was in person with him, with the home circle in England. He's in the UK. And he manifests ectoplasm. And I mean, I used to think all of this was bunk, like I really did. And now, especially having met Stuart, who is really the preeminent physical medium in the world, he's really extraordinary. And he's an elderly man, and he's still doing this. It takes an incredible amount of energy for him to do this. Anyway, he created this ectoplasm. The ectoplasm moves through the air, apparently. You can't see anything because it's a completely dark room. But then on the table in the middle of the room in front of everyone, in this very dim light, this hand materialized. And then Leslie was invited to touch it. So not only did she see a table that obviously was completely empty, right? And all of the controls are in place. They're very, very careful and diligent about having controls because Stuart is very keen on that. He wants this to be legitimate physical mediumship and be seen that way, like for historical records. So here's this table with nothing on it. And then this hand materializes and Leslie leans forward and she touches the hand. And she can feel that the hand is alive. There's no body attached to it. It's just a hand, but it's
I have
alive.
goosebumps.
Isn't it crazy, right? And she can feel the skin and she can feel the temperature of it. And there's this voice in the room communicating with her, like experiencing delight that she is having this experience. And I'm getting goosebumps right now talking about it. And just seeing her in this interview describing that experience with Stuart, the man who had manifested it, sitting there next to her and hearing them talk about how that happens and just the magic of it, was just extraordinary. And Leslie said that was a major turning point for her, like really all of her research, because she had been much more skeptical prior to those experiences. But when you have something like that happen where there's nothing, then there's something and you can touch it and you can feel it, the temperature, the texture. I mean, how do you explain that, right? Science cannot say that didn't happen, but they can't say how it did either. So to go back to what you're talking about, it's really a time for more and more and more of this intersection to occur, right, between the esoteric and the scientific. It's really time for science to expand. So Anthony and I are both super excited about that. I think, is one of the reasons we're so happy to be in this field, because we happen to be here at this time when so much is changing and growing and evolving. It's pretty awesome. What do you think, Anthony? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I really hope that, the stigmatization that has caused this, inability to speak to people in different fields or niche communities here. I hope that gets overcome, because I think someone that I think you've met as well, Colm Kelleher, who wrote the Skinwalker books, and worked at the ranch with Bigelow. He had this famous quote, and I'm not going to be able to quote it right now, but it was something like, you have the Bigfoot people don't want to talk to the ghost people because they're afraid that the ghost people will bring them down because of the stigma, and the ghost people don't want to talk to the UFO people, and the UFO people don't want to talk to the mediums, and yeah, so I get it. It's been a problem in this field for a while. So I personally as well hope that the work that you all are doing helps in what I think are different things happening around the world today that are unifying, to use Sinead's employer, unifying science and consciousness in certain ways that I think will really help move us forward and shift our paradigm. So yeah. Marina, I wanted to ask you about the notion of veridicality. So verifying some of these experiences and how you go about doing that in your work. I think that's really important because we're inundated with claims and accounts and theories, but to actually use this in a scientific study, how do you go about looking at what can be verified, and what does that like what does that look like if you're trying to produce an experiment, for example? Where you're potentially able to induce things to verify them. Can you talk about that a bit?
So in I'm gonna start with out of body experiences specifically. The way that researchers have been conducting studies to test veridicability is by asking participants, and this has been happening since the 60s, the 70s. We find studies in the literature about that, asking participants who can induce out of body experiences at will. They bring them to the lab, and then they put a target in another room, and they ask the participant to go see a target and bring the information while you are out of body. And there were some remarkable results. I think the one that is most known to everyone was Charles Start from late 60s, where he had two studies that were very remarkable. One was when he brought a lady that he called Miss Z. And Miss Z was someone that would have spontaneous OBs, but eventually she learned how to induce them and control their OBs. So she brought Miss Z to the lab. She spent 4 nights sleeping overnight in the lab. And during her fourth night, she was able to have an OB. And every night, he was placing a 5-digit number on the top of a 2 meter high shelf. um, 2 meter would be what, 6 feet. And she could not see. She was already hooked up to the EEG, laying down in bed. And he would bring this 5-digit number and place on the top of the shelf. As I mentioned, very careful that she wouldn't see the numbers inside an envelope and everything. So during the fourth night, she was able to induce an OB. And the following day, when she woke up, she remembered everything. And she said, the number is 25162, something like that. I don't know if I recollect the 5 digits correctly. And it was correct. There was the number that he had placed the night prior in the shelf, on the top of the shelf. And how do you explain that? And obviously he received a lot of criticism saying, oh, she saw when he was placing the envelope there, or she saw the number reflected on a clock or something like that. Everything that debunkers try to say not to accept the
Mhm.
result. But he was just very honest in his experiments, and he said, I really don't think she cheated, and I do think it was a genuine OB where she non-locally saw the digit that I placed. And another of his experiments was with Robert Monroe, the founder of the Monroe Institute here in Virginia. Robert Monroe was very experienced. He'd had multiple, like thousands of OBs, and he had a lot of control. And if you read his book, Journeys Out of Body, you can see out of his veridical experiences where he would go and see what a friend was doing. And then he would come back and talk to that friend and say, I just saw you talking to such and such person, and you were dressing this, and you had a hat, and he, like, it was always a hit. And if you read his book, it's just so impressive, so many veridical experiences. Charles Start also brought Robert Monroe to the lab, and he placed a 5-digit number as a target. Unfortunately, Robert Monroe was not able to see the number, but he was able to see and describe in detail what was happening in the technician's room, what the technician was doing, that she received a visit of a man, and that they were sitting on the bench and they were talking. And it's very interesting because the technician, they were not allowed to receive any visits overnight. So this is not something that he would just randomly guess as she was talking to
Yeah.
someone, because she was not even allowed to receive visits. And it was even hard to verify that information because she was very trying to protect herself and keep her job. So eventually she confirmed that her husband came and visited her. And again, it's a lot of detail. So this is how scientists have been approaching. Unfortunately, there are not many studies confirming that during OBs, people can go out of their bodies and see a target. And I would say that we have more studies showing otherwise, showing failure. And there are many reasons for that. I think one of the reasons is because sometimes researchers, they are recruiting participants that are not experienced enough. I know that Susan Blackmore, for example, she recruits students and somehow she asked them to induce OBs. I don't think you could get results with people that are not experienced enough. I think another reason is because labs, they tend to be very sterile. And something that I've learned interviewing people is that out of body experiences, they tend to be spiritual experiences, highly spiritual experiences. And it's very hard for the practitioner to choose where they're going to. It's almost that they describe that staying here in the physical world is a challenge for them. That the physical reality is so dense and low vibration compared to places that they can go during an OBE. And many times they are pulled towards something more spiritually and energetically meaningful that as soon as they are out of their bodies, they are demanded or required to do something that is meaningful, and staying here in this physical reality and going seeing a target is so meaningless and nonsense. And so this is another thing that I've learned talking to my participants, and I myself faced that experience. That I was asking participants, what did you see in the room while you're doing this? And then this participant was just crying and crying and saying, I was in this war zone, helping kids that were in this war zone while I was out of my body. And I felt so silly and rude to even ask her, but were you able to see the target that I placed in the other room? And my participant was in tears and writing down her experience, and there was another participant that she would come, and every time she would say, I saw my deceased mother, and my mom was sending me messages, and I was meeting my spirit guides, and she was learning so much from her experiences. And I was like, okay, but I'm here a scientist. Were you able to see the target that I had? And they felt so silly to me, and
Yeah.
I don't think this is something that I would be able to do again as a scientist, or if I do, that would be something completely different. So what I'm doing right now is, instead of doing these more sterile lab approaches of bringing people to the lab and putting a target, is how can we leverage the spontaneous veridical OBEs? So
Mm.
this is what I'm doing so far. I'm recruiting participants that had spontaneous veridical OBs, and I've been interviewing them. I can also interview the witness. Just to give you a little spoiler here, last week I interviewed this lady who had an OBE. She was on her 60s. This was 30 years ago. I'm sorry. And she was with her grandson and her partner in a shoe store, and she had epilepsy, and at the time she was having a seizure. She went unconscious, and then she had an OBE, and she could see everything happening up above. She could describe to me how the store looks like from that point of view, and she was like, oh, it was so interesting to me to see the shoes up above and how they look like from that perspective compared to how we are used to seeing at the same eye level.
Mhm.
And she saw when her grandson was sitting on a bench, when a guard, the mall guard, came and helped her, and she could describe the uniform and what was happening in the shoe store and how they looked like and everything that happened while she was out of the body. And then eventually she came back. She was taken by an ambulance, but everything happened while she was unconscious, and so many details to verify. And what I'm going to do now is talk to her partner that was there at the moment, and possibly her grandson who was also there in the moment, and see, did this actually happen? Did you have this conversation? Were you sitting on that bench? Was this your body position? Did this guard actually come with like the uniform, the cap, her hair, everything that she was able to describe? And so I think what I want to, I don't think this is what I want to do now, is just to leverage spontaneous retrospective accounts and possibly create something called Veridicality Index. This is something that I'm working with a statistician from New Zealand, Nifa Hummerson. And we are going to interview a lot of people, and we are going to extract what features are compelling when we think about a veridicality index. So, for example, what was the state of consciousness? Was the person awake? There could be some visual leakage, or was the person sleeping, or was the person completely unconscious, or was the person anesthetized, or was the person even clinically dead during near death experiences? What type of information the person see? Is there a witness that we can verify? Where was the information that the person verified? Was in another room, so for example, was in the same room, there could be any visual leakage, or was in another room, was in another state, or was in another country. All of those different levels of time and space that could make the acquisition of information just harder from a physicalist standpoint. So this
Mm.
is a project that I'm going to be doing now in 2026. Hopefully, we're going to create this Veridicality index that we can apply to spontaneous experiences.
Amazing. And I just wanted to comment on what you said. I was hoping you would talk about this, like the difficulty of getting verticality on things in a sterile environment when people enter some of these OBE states. Because I think to me that's so fascinating because it mirrors so much what you see and things like near death experiences and even some psychedelic experiences. If you go into it like trying to get something as an experiment, once you enter that state, it's almost like, whoa, like what the hell did you think you were trying to do here? Like you can't control this. This is so much beyond these little things you're trying to get in this reality. I think that says so much about this greater reality that we seem to enter into in these states, that maybe more pieces of ourself or more subtle pieces of ourselves come online in that state, and we realize how this is still important here, this experience and our awareness being here, but it's definitely not the whole picture, and there's so much more.
Yeah,
I think that's
shamanism.
fascinating.
Shamanism
One
that.
other question, and then I'll let Sinead. I can see she's probably got a lot to ask you. You and I have talked about this something that you've come across and some of your colleagues have come across in your research, not just in OBEs, but in NDEs, and I think you mentioned even in some of the cases of the autistic children and savants, the notion of xenoglossy. Do you mind talking a bit about that and explaining to the audience what that is and where you've seen it in some of these experiences?
Yeah, so I haven't personally myself seen xenoglossy. We do have one researcher at DOPS, Philip Cozzolino, my colleague, that is studying xenoglossy in the context of memories of past lives. So he just published a paper, very interesting. I highly recommend everyone reading, about children who can speak different languages. This is what xenoglossy is about, like the ability to speak languages that the person has never been exposed to. And these are children that can understand or talk words or small sentences of languages they've never been exposed to. And that language matches a memory of a past personality. So that's one context of studying xenoglossy. Another context of studying xenoglossy that I came across professionally was in the context of mediumship. So Chico Xavier, for example, the medium in Brazil that I wrote about in my essay, in the award-winning essay, he was able to write and sometimes speak in different languages that he's never been exposed to. So he would write fluently during trance, when he was in trance, Spanish and English, Arabic, the language from Luxembourg. How do you say the country in English?
Luxembourg?
Luxembourg. I don't even know how the language that they speak, but I know he's written in that language. And many other, I think at least 8 different languages that he's being able to write during his trances. And we are talking about a person who barely went to school. He has, almost no formal education. He went to elementary school and that's it. Who was super poor, who would work 13 hours a day to provide for his family, for everyone. So it's not someone educated who would be reading books and exposed to different languages. So it's just so remarkable to see that some people have the ability to talk different languages. And another case that to me was also interesting came from this psychiatry in Brazil that I'm working at the moment. And he shared with me this experience. I haven't seen, but he shared with me, was this autistic individual, I think at the moment he was 12, who is a non-speaker, so for 12 years completely non-speaking. And then um, I think when on his 13th birthday, something happened. So in the middle of the night, he woke up, he seemed completely possessed, and he was speaking different languages. And we're talking about an autistic, non-speaking individual who's never spoken. And on
Wow.
his 13th birthday, his parents wake up and he's just speaking horrible things, including "I'm gonna kill myself," when he was highly suicidal at the moment. So it really seemed that he was possessed by a evil entity, and he was speaking different languages.
Whoa.
So that case to me was so fascinating. And I said, do you mind if I publish this case? Because I think this is something that needs to be published. So right now he is in the process of talking to the family to see if they consent with me publishing. So
Wow.
we can see xenoglossing in many different types of phenomena, many different cases.
Yeah, and it even came up in the telepathy tapes, like in some of the cases. I remember it was what blew me away. And we see it, it's not just a dark thing. Like we see it in positive senses as well. And even if you look at like religious perceptions of these phenomena, like the notion of speaking in tongues in some like fundamentalist Christian communities, like that's a thing that happens. They claim it's the Holy Spirit coming through them. But then also in religious circles, you have possession beliefs and experiences that actually happen where like that happens as well. So it's to me it's fascinating. Like what I don't necessarily need you to theorize on it, but to me it really suggests that there's this field around us that we could be tapped into or tapping into that has this collective information and knowledge that's there, which could explain so many things that we discussed, from telepathy to remote viewing to past life memories. And yeah, that's what I love about all this.
Yeah, Tom Campbell certainly believes that. I mean, I work for his nonprofit, Marina. I know you're a fan of Tom's theory of consciousness. I mean, he definitely says that there's this, and I think Riz, our friend Rizwan Burke, both him and Tom believe in simulation theory. They both, and so many other people, say that there does seem to be this field of information. You can call it the Akashic records, you can call it whatever, but that we're able to pull from that. And so I have a question that actually segues nicely from what we were just talking about, and also alludes to a question Anthony asked you earlier at the beginning of our conversation today, Marina. He was asking you about mental health in Brazil. And then you were talking about the Spiritist hospitals, and you're also working with psychiatrists and people who are involved in mental health research and mental health work. So, what I'm thinking about right now with regard to any human being's ability to tap into this field and all the different ways that that can occur, right? And how our experiences of connecting can be scary, can be wonderful, can be everything in between, can be gentle and subtle, can be big and intense. It really is the gamut, right? And within those experiences, there's a lot of talk about mental health, because in the past, it's been the overall perception was if people are having unusual experiences, there's probably something wrong with you. So, considering that we're in a time where mental health has become a commonplace conversation, there's a lot less stigma about mental health. I'm personally seeing a lot of intersection with this field that all three of us are involved with, because it makes me think about things like the ancient seers, like in Greek mythology, Cassiopeia, who was a seer. She told the Greeks about things that were coming. Nobody believed her, and she was seen as being mentally ill. And, she was also female, which didn't help her case either. And then those things actually happened. And she was apparently someone who really existed in Greek history, right? And Tiresias is another seer in Greek culture, ancient Greek culture. So, we have these stories from the ancient times, cultures all over the world, regardless of background, doesn't matter. They all have these seers, right? And then you have, like, in more recent times, in more modern literature, stories of like maybe in the early 1900s, peasants or peddlers who would wander through towns and villages selling things. And they would always be a little quirky or a little bit off. And sometimes they would say unusual or wise things. So they'd be like the crazy person in the village that everybody would avoid, but would also be very tuned in. So it seems like we have a lot of difficulty dealing with unusual expressions of experience in people, and we tend to just lump it into the box of mental illness. But what my question is, not just for you, but in general, is, what is really going on with mental illness? Because could it actually be a form of prophecy rather than schizophrenia? Could it be a form of seeing or connecting to other dimensions, this field that we're talking about of information? Maybe these people are very tapped into it, and maybe they're so tapped into it that we just don't know what to do with it, and neither do they, because of course we're not taught to think that this kind of experience is real or have any place to put it, right? So really, to kind of ground all of this in a question, do you see in all your work with these really intense and otherworldly experiences that people have, and then also your background of working in mental health, your knowledge of mental health and wellness, the brain, neuroscience, working with psychiatrists, what do you think is happening in terms of mental health, like your own perspective? Do you think that it could indicate that these people are actually very connected individuals? Do you think that you were talking earlier about, these spiritist hospitals giving spiritual treatment rather than medication, right? And generally, if anybody's seen as having a mental illness, they're immediately medicated. That's our number one way of dealing with this. We've talked to Courtney Marcassani, who's a researcher in ufology. She used to be very involved in traditional mental health. She left it because she found it so incredibly depressing to see that all these people were just stuffed full of medication and there really wasn't any actual holistic treatment for them. So this is a very big topic right now, and so is general wellness for human beings, and so is the paranormal and the anomalous. Where do you see mental health in all of this? Like, is this a conversation that is coming up for you, considering your background and the contacts you have?
It's very important to talk about mental health, I think, especially because where DOPS is situated. We are in the Department of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences in the School of Medicine of University of Virginia. So one thing that we've been trying to do at DOPS, my colleagues and I, is to bring the topic of anomalous experiences and spirituality more mainstream to psychiatrists, and how can we educate better psychiatrists and mental health professionals. So, for example, Marietta Pelivanova, my colleague, she works with near-death experiences, and she's investigating the impact that NDEs have on experiencers and how they struggle afterwards with the experiences, and how physicians' attitudes can impact the NDE, which it can be very detrimental. So, how can we educate better mental health professionals to deal with NDEs? In my case of out of body experiences, like something that we can do is obviously similar to NDs, not to pathologize their effects, but how can we distinguish a healthy OBE from something that is more red flag, that seems more pathological? What would be the red flags? Unfortunately, screening tools for schizophrenia and dissociative disorders, we read sometimes questions like, did you ever feel that you were flying or floating? Did you ever feel out of your body? These are screening questionnaires for disorders. And when I read it, I'm like, it's just asking if a person had an out of body experience. So if it means that if I
Mm.
mark yes, I'm already, oh my goodness, this is a screening tool, I'm going to be diagnosed. So this is terrifying to me. And it's not one screening questionnaires, it's not two, multiple questionnaires. They have, just to me, what could be seen as healthy, totally healthy experiences in screening questionnaires for disorders. In the context of after death communication and hearing voices, how can we better, again, educate mental health professionals to uh, something that could be pathological as schizophrenia or a psychotic break, compared to a healthy after death communication? And in the cases of reincarnation, how do psychiatrists can receive better, all of those traumatic memories? And this is how Ian Stevenson started. He was a psychiatrist, and he was seeing in his everyday practice stressed parents and distressed children because of their memories. Many people having memories of suicide, of crimes, or violent death. And this is why people are going to psychiatrists in the first place, because these are very distressful experiences. So it's very interesting that Philip just finished a prevalence study, and he was able to see that 6% of his participants, 6% of the population of children have memories that could be classified potentially as a reincarnation. So we need to prepare psychiatrists, we need to prepare mental health professionals for those experiences. How do we not pathologize them? And many people come to us. Another thing that I want to bring up is it's very upsetting to be in this field and people coming to us and say, I want to share this experience, but I have to say something. I am not crazy, okay? I am a normal person. I have a profession. I'm an engineer, and it's very remarkable to see that people will start when they start describing their experiences. Sometimes the first paragraph is, I want to tell you that I am an engineer, that I have a career, that I have a PhD, that I have such and such, almost like justifying
Yeah.
what's going to come next.
That's such a common overlap with our field that we see in the UFO and HI space as well. It's there. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And actually, it's you just pull kind of words out of my mouth. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine last night who's not involved in any of this at all. But she's one of my closest friends. I'm open with her and I tell her about my own weird experiences. And she doesn't know what to do with them. But she literally said that. She said to me that when I tell her about like if I was telling her about you, Marina, and I was telling her about, oh, my friend Marina had this really amazing experience, unusual, esoteric kind of experience. She says, I always say, Marina has a PhD. She's a scientist. She's like, it's almost like I need her to know this person is grounded. She just said this to me last night. And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize I was doing that. Like,
Yeah.
to me, it was to help her have context so she could believe it. But she said, I believe you. I believe that these things are real. I don't need you to tell me. But people, even me, even in this field, I've been in this field for years, I still feel this need to be like, it's real. It's, this is to justify it, as you said,
Yeah.
to validate it. Yeah.
Well, we're pushing close to it. We're at an hour and a half right now, in length, and we want to go too much longer, but we could talk to you forever. We definitely would love to have you back, Marina. But before we close up, I wanted to bring up where this episode is going to air right before we air our interviews with Annika and Tristan. And they mentioned some of the work that they're trying to have done on their case to figure out what could be going on with them. Do you mind sharing a bit about what you're doing with them, the study?
And maybe who they
Sure.
are as well, so
Yeah.
that just in case if anyone hasn't seen those episodes. Yeah.
Yeah. So Annika and Tristan are a very interesting case of how they declare themselves two souls in a body. And the first time I heard about Annika and Tristan was someone sending an email, like another parapsychologist sent an email and said, you have to watch this interview on Jeffrey Mishlove, New Thinking Aloud. And then I watched all 4 interviews and I was mind blown. I was like, this is like bizarre. This is incredible. I was so mind blown, almost as I was with materialization, that it took me like a full year to integrate and process everything that I was seeing. But Annika and Tristan was, I would say, almost at that level.
I think you messaged me like right around that time and you're like, "Have you seen these interviews? You have to watch them." I was like, "What?" Yeah, it blew me away too.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting case, and they have received in the past diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder, the old multiple personality, and this is how psychiatry put them in a box. This is how psychiatry tries to explain this is what's happening, and also I have to share this with you too. Like the first time I brought the field of Annika and Tristan, and I shared with my colleagues, oh, I'm potentially interested in studying this case of two souls in a body, when I quickly described, one of my colleagues just looked at me and said, oh, but this is this dissociative identity disorder. What's the catch about it? Like why is it a Dobbs thing or something? So do you guys understand that even in his mind, oh, if psychiatry puts this inside that box, if the psychiatry labels this as DID, why are you interested in studying this adopted? Like we've already explained, we've already there's nothing left, it's just a case of DID. And then I looked at him and I said, this is a label that mainstream psychiatrists put on people to try to explain, using this philosophical framework, how they see that case. That doesn't mean that's how they feel. That doesn't mean that's how Annika and Tristan share the story. That doesn't mean that's how Annika and Tristan experience the road. And that doesn't mean that it's actually the truth. So we are here as scientists to be unbiased and not to actually what is happening here. I want to report what is happening here. And from what I've seen and the multiple conversations and chat that I had with them, including in-person exchange, I find it so hard to explain this with a simple dissociative identity disorder type of thing. And there are so many things, like we can go on and on the list of the symptoms, the trauma and everything that should be the way they change from one personality to the other, how different they are, the way they talk, their personalities, the way they look, what they say, their allergies, everything is just so, it's literally, like, to me, I literally feel that I'm talking to two different people when I'm talking to them.
Hmm.
I mean, now I've kind of normalized my experience, so I'm able to have a conversation and just automatically say, "How are you guys?" But I
Mhm.
have to admit that in the beginning, it took me a while. And first time that I saw them and then I had a Zoom chat, I was like, this is bizarre, and it's going to take me a while to cognitively accommodate what I'm seeing. And I had my mouth open, I think, for an hour. And then the second time I talked to them, I was like, okay, I think this is I accept a little bit better. And then I saw that in person, and then another chat, and then another interview, that I came to a point now that I met with them this week, and it's just so normal to me to see two people and be talking to two people. But it does take a while, even for a parapsychologist like me, to make sense and integrate, just like the materialization was. It does take a while for someone to
Yeah.
make sense and accept that, yeah, that could be different from the explanation that I've been receiving for the past 40 years. This could be, maybe psychiatrists are wrong. Maybe we have to be open for other possibilities.
Mm.
The optics are so, I mean, I've tripped up, like they've become very good friends of ours. And I still sometimes say, like, if Anthony and I, and they're on a Zoom call, there's 3 bodies, but 4 people. And I'll still catch myself saying the 3 of us, because my brain is seeing one person. And I'm so used to, like, here in this physicality, this physical dimension, right? Physicalism, we think that whatever is physical is real. And so, the optics of everything is so determining for us, right? Like, we are automatically making assumptions about objects or people based purely on the optics before we even interacted with them. So my brain has difficulty computing sometimes that I mean, not anymore. Like, now I'm much better at it, but I just tripped up the other day and said the 3 of us. I still do it sometimes. And they just laugh it off. They're cool about it because they get it. Like, they totally understand. But it's also, it is so remarkable. I mean, watching them interact with each other blows my mind. Like, the way they talk to each other, and they look at each other, even though they're in the same body. When they look off, and look at each other, you can see in the expression of the eye that they're looking at each other. It's not the same thing as when someone's just looking off at the sky or off in the distance. There's a certain expression in the eyes
Yeah.
when that happens. But when
Yeah.
they're doing that, you can see that
Yes.
they're reading the other person's
Yeah.
eyes. It's
And
just
they
as
talk, and they talk to each other when no one is watching. And
yeah,
I have my scientist mind, and I'm always like observant and saying, I'm gonna, now it's gonna happen. I'm gonna catch. I'm gonna debunk. I still have that inside me. I have to
Sure.
admit, but it never happens. And then, like, even when they're by themselves and I observe, like, oh my goodness, this is so incredible. They're talking to each other, and they have, it's not that they're trying to prove to anyone, because, and like, when they are talking to me, and I'm like, now they're gonna miss the name, and Annika with the female voice is gonna miss the name, and they're gonna do something, they're gonna
Yeah.
sleep, it's gonna happen. And I'm constantly watching so closely, and it never happens.
Yeah.
They're magic. They're just magic.
Yeah, they're 100% genuine, like, that's what we can be certain of, like and they'll be the first to tell you, like, "We don't know for sure what like, how this works or what what this is," but I can say with certainty that they're not trying to mislead anyone, like, they're being who they are, and it's an actual phenomenon that's happening with them, so
Yeah, and I mean, the more you get to know them, right? Like as the three of us have been able to do, the more you witness the truth of it. You see how subtly their faces change, their voices are so distinctive. They left me a voicemail a few weeks ago, and I played it for my mom without telling her anything. I was like, "Oh, mom, I'm just going to play this voicemail because I was driving in the car." Anthony knows about this. I was driving in the car, and I'm just like, "Mom, I'm just going to listen to this voicemail from my friends," and she's like, "Okay." So I play the voicemail, and it's Annika and Tristan, right? And she's like, "Oh, who are they?" And I'm like, "Oh, did you hear 2 voices?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Well, guess what?" And I told her, she's like, "What?" And she's open to it, she thought that was remarkable. But it's so clear it's 2 different
yeah,
people. Anyway, we could talk about this forever. It's just
yeah.
amazing.
And
I
one thing that it's like, I think it's nice to mention is that they are so brave to come up and
Yep,
tell their stories in public.
totally.
They're not embarrassed of not only having two personalities, two souls, whatever, but their past, whatever. And I think this is so beautiful how brave they are, and how new people are coming up and sharing. I also have that. And Annika and Tristan sent me three different cases of multiple souls in the body. I've talked to another case of three souls in the body that they recommended.
Wow,
And Alex Gomez Marin, who is collaborating with me in this project, he also talked to another one. This phenomena is called walking phenomena, which is when you are born with one physical body and then another soul walks in, takes a ride, and inhabits the body with you, one or two other souls, it could be. So, what we want to do now is collect more interviews, understand more the phenomenon, and possibly write a manuscript reporting the walking phenomena. How does it differentiate from a diagnosis of DID? Because they are different, and we like it's just different. And the phenomenological accounts, like how are they experiencing the road, which is again fascinating how they describe that one is on the driver's seat, the other one is on the passenger seat. Someone can take full control of the body, and it ranges from 0 to 100% of what one controls of the body. So all of these things we're trying to put on a manuscript and report to scientists. So it
amazing.
seems that it's I wouldn't say a new phenomenon. Obviously, it's not a new phenomenon, but something that is definitely not explored enough in
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to check that out. Even and the notion of walk-in souls is also touches on some things in the UFO NHI space as well that's discussed there. So it's interesting. I can't wait to see what comes out of that. And I know I said last question, but real fast, speaking of UFOs and NHI, if you're comfortable talking about this, you had heard about the Varginha case because you're from around that area, right? And you were around that area for a bit. Can you speak a bit like what your experience was with that and how you heard about it and what it was like being from Brazil to hear about that case?
Yeah, because all 3 of us are gonna be attending James Fox's National Press Club gallery event on Tuesday. So great question, Anthony. I love it.
Yes, this will air a few weeks after that, so we don't know yet what's going to happen there, but I want to hear from your experience what that was like.
Yeah. Well, when that happened was 1996,
96.
right? I was 13. I'm not from that area, so that is more central part of Brazil. I'm from the very south. But yes, it was just a national event. I mean, everyone remembers what happened at the case. Unfortunately, the case of Varginha was so ridiculed by the media and I mean government and everything that I think that a few weeks or months later, people were just not talking about the case anymore out of fear because everyone was just making fun of the case. But it was everywhere on the news. It was In one of the hospitals that they claim one of the beings was taken is the hospital where I did my PhD, UNICAMP, the University of Campinas. And
Cool.
one of my friends, one of my good friends that I mentioned earlier in this interview, he was my colleague in the same lab. He tried to track down maybe possible physicians that were involved in the case, but it was just he couldn't get anything. No one would mention anything. So you cannot get any information from anyone. People just do not talk about that. So it's still speculation right now where the being was taken, if it was taken to Unicamp or not. It seems so, but it's just really hard to get information because no one talks. And you probably saw in the documentary James Fox, like people are just scared. And I think now, after 30 years or so, people are finally feeling more comfortable. The three girls are finally being more comfortable. Yes, this is what happened. But still, many people are, they've been threatened and they fear for their lives. But like to me, what I remember the most is, yes, it was a big thing. Virginia became nationally recognized after that happened. No one's ever heard about Virginia because it's a small city in the countryside. And then after that happened, it was just everywhere on the news. But it was just so ridiculed that people just didn't want to talk about that anymore, because they're like, really? Do you believe that there was a crash there? How can you believe that? And that was um, the
Response.
general attitude. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
giving me more context for you're giving me a memory. So about a year ago, maybe more than that, James, who is kind of a friend of mine, texted me and said, like on Facebook Messenger is what we usually use to communicate. He goes, I just got the interview. He was freaking out. He was like, I just got the interview of my career. I can't believe it. I never thought I would get anything like this. And that's when he didn't give me any details at the time, of course, because it was confidential, but that's when he got the doctor who was the one who was with the being in the hotel in the hotel room in the hospital.
Yeah. That's Dr. Italo Venturelli. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who will be at the press event in DC. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So him and James just couldn't believe it. He's like, "Oh my god, I have this person who directly, personally interacted with this being and is willing, not just that, is willing to go on record. Voice, face, full name, identity is still employed at the same hospital." I mean, this was a huge win for James. He's just so excited about this because of the stigma because of the fact that so many people, hundreds of witnesses, hundreds of people who smelled that incredibly toxic smell that was filling the hospital and the area. I mean, hundreds of people saw a ball of light, saw a being, saw, whatever. But still, it was stigmatized. It was so kind of brushed aside. So you've just sort of emphasized for me even more why he was so excited. And now I'm extra happy that we're going to this event because James has worked so hard to bring this
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
forefront. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
One thing that you learn from the documentary, like it took him 30 years to
Yeah.
come up and give 30 years. And he only did that because the other physician had a heart attack. And I think he had a heart attack and he feared and he was like, if I don't do this now, I might just die and just take this to the grave with me. And he was like, I think this is about time that I share my story with people. So I'm glad he didn't die when he had his heart attack and he was brave enough to share after 30 years what
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. And prior to that, I mean, people kind of had made a big deal about this, but he originally had said that he had just seen or heard about the case and had not been in the room. And then he changed that later on. But I mean, I don't know about you, but we see this often with experiencer accounts, like when they're first talking about something, that they kind of ease you in after they gauge your response and reactivity to how weird the story is, and I can't imagine what that's like if you're the head neurosurgeon of a huge hospital, right? With all that stigma, that could
He
affect
would
your
probably
career.
have been fired and ridiculed and not being able to find a job, So he did the right thing at the time. He said, yes, I just heard about it and that's it. So he was just, I'm going to
Yeah.
Yeah,
Also,
yeah,
preserving himself.
he's also said that because the doctor was his experience was so emotional because he communicated telepathically with this being, right? And he cries in the recent film that James just did. Everyone's seen this clip by
yeah.
this He cries because
That
it was
scene was intense. Yeah.
remarkable. It was so emotional. He felt nothing but love and compassion from this being that looked and smelled hideous, but the energy of the being was something else.
He
So it
called it an angel, like, as he was crying, like,
yeah,
in that clip, and that was just wow.
can't wait to see it. I'm so
Me
excited. So
too.
anyway,
I'm so looking
We
forward.
gotta try to make a conversation happen between you 2, especially about the telepathic part of this. I think that would be very interesting.
Yes.
agree.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Marina, thank you so much for being on here with us. It's so good to finally have you on. I think you were one of the first interviews I wanted to have when I started this podcast before Sinead came on board, and I'm so glad we were able to do this. Thank you again.
You too.
And to the audience, please, thank you for watching, for sticking around if you lasted this long. Thank you. And please click those like and subscribe buttons, follow us and support us on Patreon. We'd love to have you part of our community, and thanks again.
Yeah, Marina, thank you so much. That was an absolutely outstanding interview. We hope everyone enjoyed it, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for being with us, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.